Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Threadbare Reviews. Today's novel was the recommendation of patron Eugenio Triana, who asked that I review the book Blindsight, written by Peter Watts in 2006. Blindsight is the first book in Watts' Firefall series, although the other book in the series isn't exactly a sequel. More on that later. About the author. Peter Watts is a Canadian author who was born in 1958. He got his bachelor's degree in science at the University of Guelph in Ontario, and then earned a PhD in biology from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. Throughout the 90s, he worked as a biologist specializing in marine mammals, and he was employed by a variety of organizations that wanted to either conserve, ignore, or exploit the ocean. Over time, he became disillusioned with his work and started to focus on writing science fiction. Watts' writing career started with short stories while he was still a doctorate student, and he published his first science fiction novel in 1999. The book's title is Starfish, and it would be the first book of a trilogy called Rifters. The Rifters series focuses on humans who have been physically altered to survive in the depths of the ocean, and after he finished with that series, he published the book Blindsight in 2006. Blindsight was particularly well received when it came out, winning several minor awards and getting a nomination for the 2007 Hugo, Locus, and Campbell Awards. Plus, at least according to Watts' website, Blindsight has also become a required text in several college courses about philosophy and neuroscience. I also suspect the book was an influence on the 2017 video game Prey, because the aliens described in the book have more than a few things in common with the ones from the game. But that's about all I could dig up about the author, so let's dig into the text. The review. The protagonist of Blindsight is a man named Siri Keaton. Keaton had one hemisphere of his brain removed as a child because of a neurological disease, and ever since then he's been very good at reading other people's emotions, but very bad at experiencing his own. Empathy in particular is quite difficult for him. In 2082, a group of unknown objects drop onto Earth in a precise grid, apparently as some sort of scouting mission by aliens. Humans then spot a signal in the Kuiper Belt, the ring of asteroids and dwarf planets at the edge of the solar system, and so they dispatch a manned space mission to investigate it. Siri is the synthesist on the spaceship Theseus, which means it's his job to listen to the other crew members and translate their technical jargon into something that an average person could understand. The rest of the crew includes Amanda Bates, a military specialist, Isaac Spindle and Robert Cunningham, who are the team's biologist and his replacement, Susan James, who has split her personality into 4 pieces to better understand linguistics and behavior patterns, and Juka Sarasti, a vampire. As it turns out, vampires were real, until they got wiped out by right-angle architecture. But before then, they could only live by eating human flesh, they were much smarter than baseline humans, and they could lie dormant for decades in order to avoid overhunting their prey. The book provides an example of vampire intelligence by saying that they can keep both the up and down aspects of the wireframe Necker cube in their heads at the same time. But I can do that by unfocusing my eyes and concentrating for a few seconds, and so I wasn't all that impressed. Anyway, the signal turns out to be a decoy for the real alien vessel, which is gathering mass from a super Jovian gas giant hidden away in the Kuiper Belt. Susan James opens communication with the alien ship, only to learn that she's talking to a chatbot, basically. And after several repeated trips into the ship, they discover a bunch of strange many-limbed aliens that act as the ship's white blood cells rather than as independent beings. Eventually, the vampire and the ship's AI conclude that the aliens are non-sentient, and in fact, sentience and self-awareness are mistakes of evolution that will eventually lead to humanity's downfall. The ship ejects Siri Keaton so that he can head back to Earth and pass on this information. Meanwhile, the Theseus rams the aliens to blow them up. During the years-long journey back to Earth, Siri notices that the planet goes strangely quiet, and it's possibly because the resurrected and non-sentient vampires back home have finally wiped out the human race. Because of this ending, Blindsight's sequel Echopraxia takes place at around the same time, but in a different part of the solar system. I found it difficult to read this book. Not because of the style or the science or any grammatical mistakes, but simply because I'm an eternal optimist, and this book was clearly written by a pessimist. And not just any old pessimist either. Peter Watts strikes me as the kind of person who believes that because he focuses on negatives, and the people around him try to avoid thinking about negatives, that makes him smarter, or at the very least more realistic, than anyone else. He is the only person to bring up certain unfortunate truths, and therefore he is the only person willing to accept reality for the garbage fire that it is. I have an objection or two on that front, but I'll wait for the analysis section to go into detail. As for the style, the most notable device the book uses is regular flashbacks that explain Siri's relationships with his parents and with Chelsea, an old girlfriend who tried to fix Siri but ultimately failed. These segments provide extra characterization for Siri and for Earth culture, while underlining the book's themes, but ultimately they have no real impact on the main plot. The crew of the Theseus is an interesting bunch, especially considering that just about all of them have diagnosable mental disorders. However, these disorders are presented as positives, as the reasons why the crew is able to excel at their jobs. Now, I have no problem with the idea that neurodiversity can be a good thing, but when combined with the pessimistic tone of the book, the message sounds less like make lemonade out of lemons and more like your brain is messed up and will never get better, so just accept it. Don't bother trying to improve yourself. Speaking as someone who has worked on improving his mental issues, with some success, I don't like hearing that we shouldn't bother trying to improve ourselves. But maybe that's just my personal impression. Now, there is something I definitely liked about this book, which is the fact that the crew of the Theseus always acts intelligently and always makes the best decisions possible based on the information they obtain. They do make mistakes, and they do get overwhelmed by the enemy at times, but they learn from those mistakes, and in the end, they figure out how the aliens work and destroy the threat. Incidentally, this sets up yet another parallel with the previous review, since the crew of the Prometheus faced a similar unknown situation and proceeded to bumble through it like a pack of idiots. In a comparison with Prometheus, Blindsight definitely comes out ahead. The analysis. So, the novel Blindsight doesn't require analysis as such, because the book is quite plain about the themes and messages it's trying to tell. And if that's not enough, Peter Watts has included a thesis at the end of the novel that goes into detail about all the points he's making, complete with an extensive bibliography. So I'm not going to pick apart the text in this section. Instead, I'm going to go point by point and explain why I think Peter Watts is wrong about some of the conclusions he comes to. I'm not saying he got his facts wrong, but I don't think he got enough of them to reach the most accurate conclusions. Number 1. Technology implies belligerence. Watts makes the argument that humans and other tool-using animals develop technology because they have needs that aren't being met. If a species reaches a point where all of their needs are met, they will stop developing technology and be content with whatever it is they have. If a species continues to expand to the point of space travel, it therefore follows that the species is still actively hunting for resources and will be hostile to any other species it finds that happens to be using them. Now, I will agree that expanding species or cultures can be hostile, but I'd also say that technology implies empathy. To develop advanced technology, you need a lot of things that you can't supply yourself. Tools, knowledge of past inventions, knowledge of physics and chemistry and mathematics, an infrastructure to build the things you invent, and enough food to keep you going while you're working on something that isn't getting you more food. You need the support of those around you to develop advanced technology. You need parents and a whole damn community to teach you about the past and not just show you how they hunt. Modern technology is based on thousands of generations of development, and that development is only possible because humans are the most social and empathetic species on the planet. Expansion implies belligerence, that's true, but the technology required to expand into the stars implies empathy. Number 2. Human development will plateau. This is a corollary of point 1, because part of the idea behind the setting is that humans are less developed and less belligerent than the invading aliens. The centerpiece of this idea is that humans will develop virtual reality simulations that offer better experiences than reality, and so the majority of the species will lock itself into technological tombs in order to play around inside their own heads for the rest of their lives. I don't believe this will happen, or at least not to the extent seen in the book. Humans have a pathological need to communicate with others, a need expressed through art, through gossip, through message boards, and through this video that you're watching right now. You want to hear my opinions, and I want to share them with you. This need for validation and information runs so deep, it even affects people who have no ability to feel empathy. Therefore, people will still want to communicate with each other even if they lock themselves in a virtual reality simulation. And therefore, people will still argue with each other because no two people can live the exact same lives and thus come to the exact same conclusions. And if that's not enough, people will always take what they have for granted and want more, if for no other reason than to have more than other people. Humans as a species can never be satisfied. And number 3, the big one. Conscious thought is an evolutionary dead end. I read Watts' essay about this theory just to make sure I was completely clear about his opinion. He explains that he found plenty of philosophical and neurological theories about what consciousness is, but he couldn't find any papers that fully explained what it was for. He notes that chimpanzees have a better brain-to-body ratio than orangutans, but are less likely to identify themselves in mirrors, and that non-apes like monkeys and birds have more sophisticated language systems than most apes. He then says that the only use for self-awareness that he could find was the appreciation of aesthetics, which in itself does not help a species survive. Well then, Peter Watts, let me explain what conscious thought is for. First of all, brain size and brain efficiency are not directly related. Plus, there are a multitude of animals that have proven themselves to be self-aware, including birds like parrots and corvids. Second, and I've said this before, but all art is an attempt by humans to communicate with each other through a medium that is more than words. Our sense of aesthetics is quite simply our ability to understand these advanced communications. Music can communicate moods, pictures can tell stories, and stories themselves can help your audience visualize events they didn't witness and understand the points of view of people that aren't themselves. And when enough people share enough stories, they create a culture. Consciousness and aesthetics are required for any species that wants to build a community big enough to have any hope of developing technology. And that's not all. Conscious thought also seems to play a role in impulse control and long-term planning. And I don't just mean end-of-the-day long-term planning, I mean where will I be in 10 years planning. Humans can design and follow diet plans to get in shape at the end of 6 months. We can put money away for our retirements, and we can make short-term sacrifices for the sake of our long-term careers. It's true that humans don't always plan that far ahead, and we often listen to our impulses more than we should, but so far as I'm aware, no other species is anywhere near as good as humans at impulse control. So, Peter Watts, the point of conscious thought is to improve our communication skills and to regulate our impulses. Our trains of thought may require a significant number of calories to keep running, but I can tell you for certain that it is not an evolutionary dead end. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have a little extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.